In the middle of an Iranian desert, where the summer air claws past 100 degrees and the ground bakes hard as fired clay, people kept their homes cool, drank chilled water, and ate ice in the dead of July, using a machine with no electricity, no fuel, and not a single moving part. Versions of that machine are still running today. The oldest ones date back roughly 2,700 years, and a few have kept flowing through droughts, floods, earthquakes, and the rise and fall of entire empires. The men who built it didn't call it a marvel. They called it the murderer. And here's the part that should bother you. We didn't lose this technology. We didn't forget how it works. We abandoned it on purpose in living memory. And the thing that killed it is probably sitting in your driveway right now. To understand why any of that happened, you first have to understand what it could actually do. Picture the worst week of your summer. The air conditioner running non-stop, the compressor outside roaring through the night, the power bill climbing into the hundreds, and the quiet dread that comes when the grid strains and the lights flicker. Because the moment that box on the wall dies, your house becomes an oven. Across the American Sun Belt, peak summer cooling bills routinely land between $400 and $600 a month, and every one of those dollars is rented from a utility company that can raise the price whenever it likes. Now go back 2,500 years to a place hotter than Phoenix, with no grid to plug into and no compressor to fail. The people living there solved that exact problem so completely that we are only now, with supercomputers, beginning to understand how well it worked. The system is called a qanat. At its simplest, it is a hand-dug underground river, a gently sloping tunnel that reaches back into the base of a mountain, taps an aquifer where the water table runs high, and walks that water downhill by gravity alone for miles, until it surfaces in the middle of a settlement. No pump, no pressure, just a tunnel cut at precisely the right angle so the water is always gently falling. That underground river did far more than fill cups. Stand the qanat's outlet at the bottom of a tall slotted tower, the Persian windcatcher the bad gear, and you build a machine that breathes. Hot desert wind hits the tower, gets funneled down the shaft, and is dragged across the cold, damp surface of the qanat water before it ever reaches the living quarters. By the time that air rolls into the room, it has given up its heat to the water through evaporation. In a dry desert climate, that single trick could drop the temperature of the incoming air by as much as 25 degrees Fahrenheit. No electricity, no refrigerant. Just moving air over cold water, the way nature has cooled things since the first cave. And cooling the air was the modest version of the trick. By around 400 BCE, the same civilization was using that cold underground water to do something that sounds like a lie. They were making and storing ice in the desert through the summer. They paired the qanat with a structure called a yakhchal, a towering mud brick dome over a deep pit. And they harvested ice through the freezing desert nights, then sealed it underground where the qanat cooled air and the dome's massive walls kept it frozen for months. Ice cream, chilled drinks, preserved food, in a place where daytime temperatures could kill you, centuries before refrigeration had a name. For a long time, modern engineers assumed the old accounts had to be exaggerated. So in 2017, a British engineering firm built a full computational model of a yakhchal and ran the physics. The simulation confirmed it. The passive cooling worked exactly the way the ancient builders said it did. They hadn't gotten lucky, they had gotten it right. So now the obvious question. If a free fuel-proof machine could cool your home, freeze your water, and run for thousands of years, who in their right mind would build one by hand? That's where the name comes from. Digging a qanat meant sinking a vertical shaft straight down into the earth, then carving a tunnel sideways through the dark, often 100 feet or more below the surface, with hand tools by oil lamp, sometimes for years. The men who did it were called muqani, professional underground diggers, a hereditary craft passed from father to son, well paid and deeply respected, precisely because the work could erase you in an instant. The tunnels caved in. In loose soil, the walls came down without warning. The air at the bottom went bad, and a man could suffocate in the dark before anyone above knew anything was wrong. And the final danger was the cruelest, because it arrived at the moment of success. When a digger finally broke through into the water-bearing rock, the water could burst in and drown him in the very tunnel he'd just finished. So the Mukani watched the flame of his oil lamp the way a miner watches a canary. If it guttered and dimmed, the air was turning lethal, and it was time to climb for your life. He said a prayer before he went down. He would refuse to work on a day he decided was unlucky, and if he sneezed on his way to the shaft, he might turn around and go home, because to a man who walked into that hole every morning, every omen was worth respecting. They didn't call it the murderer for effect, they named it for the friends it took. And what those men built by feel, in the dark, with rope and lamplight, is almost impossible to believe. Consider the qanat at Gonabad in eastern Iran. Its main shaft and the mother well, sunk straight down to the water source, reaches nearly 1,000 feet into the earth. That is about the height of the Eiffel Tower, dug by hand downward into solid ground. From the bottom of that shaft, the tunnel runs about 20 miles to where the water finally surfaces, linking 427 separate vertical wells along the way and demanding the removal of an almost unimaginable volume of earth. Every basketful of it hauled up to the surface by hand. It was completed around 2,700 years ago. It is still flowing today. And the slope, the single most important number in the entire system, had to be nearly perfect over those 20 miles. Cut the tunnel too steep, and the rushing water carves into the floor and collapses it. Cut it too flat, and the water stalls, stagnates, and dies. The Mukani had no modern instruments. They held the tunnel straight and on grade with plumb lines, knotted measuring ropes, and patient sighting, lining up a pair of oil lamps and steering from one flame to the next to hold a true heading through total darkness, hundreds of feet underground. And parts of that work were done the hardest way imaginable, excavating from the bottom upward, a man cutting overhead, blind, in the worst conditions the trade could offer. To meet a shaft coming down the other way, and to do it accurately enough that two tunnels carved separately through solid rock actually met. The result of all that risk wasn't just water. It was water that has never failed. Because the source at Gonabad sits 1,000 feet down, droughts on the surface, and disasters above ground have had no measurable effect on its discharge. Its flow rate, often estimated at 30 to 40 gallons every second, has stayed remarkably stable over a span of time that makes most nations look young. That is the literal answer to how these homes survive droughts. Their water didn't come from the sky that season. It came from deep inside a mountain, and it kept coming, whether it rained or not. A machine that valuable needed rules. And the rules the Persians invented around it were as ingenious as the tunnel itself. Because here is a problem you may never have considered. When a whole town depends on one underground river, how do you split it fairly? You can't fence flowing water. You can't easily measure gallons in a mud channel. So the Persians didn't divide the water by volume at all. They divided it by time. A respected, scrupulously honest elder called the Mir Ab, the master of the water, ran the distribution, and the clock he used was a small, brilliant device called a fenjan. It was a bowl with a tiny hole in the bottom, floated in a larger pot of water. Water seeped in through the hole, and over a fixed interval, the bowl slowly filled and sank. Each time it sank, that was 1 unit of time. And the manager dropped a pebble into a jar to keep the count, all day and all night. Your share of the river wasn't a quantity, it was a slot on that clock. Shareholders were sorted into day owners and night owners, and your turn to open your channel and take the water arrived on schedule, counted out pebble by 2 trusted elders working in shifts around the clock. By the 4th century BCE, Greek chroniclers were already describing the Persians using these water clocks to share qanat water fairly. An entire institution of law and timekeeping had grown up around a hole in a bowl, and your place in that society was mapped, quite literally, onto the tunnel. Because the water got warmer and scarcer the farther it traveled from the source, the wealthy and powerful settled at the upper end, near the mother well, where the flow was coldest and strongest. The poor settled downstream, where the water arrived weaker and more used. A single qanat might be owned communally by anywhere from 10 to 250 people, holding inherited shares passed down across generations like any other family fortune. Your standing in the world could be read off of how far you lived from the head of the channel. Remember those shareholders. Their inherited obligation is going to matter later when we get to how all of this fell apart. This was not a regional curiosity. It was one of the most successful technologies in human history, and almost nobody talks about its scale. As recently as 2010, Iran still had around 36,300 active qanat channels. Lay all their tunnels end to end, and you get roughly 135,000 miles of hand-dug underground waterway, enough to wrap around the entire planet more than 5 times. And the idea didn't stay in Persia. It spread along the trade routes and under empires into dozens of countries, under dozens of names. They called it the Foggara in Algeria, the Falaj in Oman, and the Emirates, the Khares in the Turpan oasis of western China. It spread on a vast scale into Muslim-ruled Spain. There is even a Roman-era qanat in Luxembourg. And under the city of Palermo in Sicily, Arab engineers built a qanat system that fed something extraordinary, a sirocco room, a chamber deliberately air-conditioned by running qanat water beneath it and a wind tower above it, so the wealthy could retreat from the scorching sirocco wind into cool, damp, breathing air. The same machine exported across half the world, doing the same impossible thing in a dozen different languages. And none of it was folk superstition or lucky trial and error. The Persians understood the science. Around the year 1017, a Persian mathematician named Al-Kharajhi wrote a book called The Extraction of Hidden Waters. It is one of the oldest surviving manuals of hydrology and groundwater engineering on Earth, and in it, Al-Kharajhi lays out correctly where groundwater actually comes from. That it originates as rain and snow, soaks into the high ground, and flows underground from higher elevation to lower under its own pressure. That sounds obvious now. It was not. In Europe, scholars went on believing well into the 19th century that groundwater welled up from some mysterious source deep in the earth, disconnected from the rain. Al-Kharajhi had the water cycle essentially right roughly 800 years before Western science caught up. The qanat wasn't ancient guesswork. It was applied physics, written down 1,000 years ago. Which brings us back to the strangest fact of all. This machine was, by design, almost disaster-proof. Being underground and gravity-fed, a qanat loses almost no water to evaporation. The desert sun never touches it. It barely flinches between wet years and dry ones, delivering only gradual, gentle changes in flow, while rivers and reservoirs above ground swing wildly. It rides out floods. It stands up to earthquakes. And it was even built to survive war. Those dozens of vertical shafts weren't only there for digging and air. Their sheer number made it far harder for an attacking army to fill in the wells and choke off a city's water. And the branching tunnels meant a single collapse could never take the whole system down. A source of free water and free cooling that shrugged off drought, flood, earthquake, and even sabotage, refined over 2,500 years, exported across 3 continents, and backed by real science. So what could possibly kill a thing like that? Not war, not climate, not some catastrophe out of the sky. It was the pump. In the middle of the 20th century, the cheap diesel and electric water pump arrived, and with it, the deep well. Instead of spending years carving a tunnel back into a mountain to meet the water table where it naturally ran high, you could now drill a narrow hole straight down anywhere you liked, drop in a pump, and suck groundwater up out of the earth faster than the ground could ever refill it. It was cheaper. It was faster. It needed no Mokhani, no Mir Ab, no Fenjan, no shareholders, no centuries of accumulated craft. One man with a drill and a diesel engine could do in a week what once took a village a generation. And it quietly murdered the murderer. Because the deep well and the qanat were drinking from the same aquifer. And the pump drank faster. As deep wells spread across Iran starting in the early 1950s, they pulled the water table down below the level the old gravity tunnels could reach. The qanats didn't dry up because the rain stopped. They dried up because a few hundred yards away, a machine was draining their source from underneath them. Iranian hydrologists estimate that over the past half-century, roughly half of all of Iran's qanats have been rendered waterless. Tehran, a city of millions, drew much of its water from roughly 220 qanats as recently as 70 years ago. Today, the vast majority of them sit dead and dry. And here, those communal owners come back into the story. A qanat survives only if its shareholders keep paying every year to send men back down into the dark to clear the silt and shore up the walls. As the wells lured people away and the flows weakened, the poorer shareholders downstream often simply couldn't raise their share of the maintenance cost anymore. So the tunnels were left to choke and collapse, one abandoned channel at a time. Until a machine that had outlasted the Achaemenid Empire, the Roman Empire, the Mongol conquests, and 2,700 years of history was finished off in a single human lifetime by a fuel pump and a maintenance bill. A perfectly drought-resistant technology undone by a technology that creates drought. A system that took almost nothing from the land, replaced by one that is pumping the aquifers of an entire region dry, and leaving the people who switched facing the exact water shortages the old tunnels were built to survive. And here is what should keep you up at night. The qanat didn't fail. The physics never stopped working. Gravity still pulls water downhill for free. The night sky still freezes a shallow pool in the desert dark. Cold water still strips the heat out of moving air, exactly as it did 2,500 years ago. Which is why engineers are quietly studying these systems again, and why the windcatchers still standing over the city of Yazd still cool the rooms beneath them right now in summers that push past 100 degrees on zero electricity. Nothing was lost, nothing broke. We were handed a machine that cools a home, freezes water, and runs for millennia on sun and gravity alone. And we walked away from it for a cheaper hole in the ground and a diesel engine, because the cheaper hole didn't ask us to maintain anything or share anything or learn anything our grandfathers already knew. The director of the Qanat Research Center in Kerman said it as plainly as it can be said. History will never forgive us for what they have done to our qanats.